What's going on today, Internet? Selfish here with Retrospect. Today we're going to take a look at the RGB20SX from Powkiddy, and we're going to see if it lives up to the expectations and the love of the RGB30. Let's take a look. Today we're going to be taking a look at the RGB20SX. If nothing else, Powkiddy put it in a box that wasn't yellow. I think this is the first time that they haven't put it in a generic box so they can be resold under a different name, which is fantastic. Good looking box. Anyways, that's not what we're here for. I don't really understand the blue versus red thing that's on here. They don't even make a blue version of this device, but it is kind of fun to see it on the front of the box. Also the red buttons. Really nothing on this box says anything about the actual device itself other than a sort of sketch of it. We're going to take a look inside the box here. I did have to steal the power cable out of here because it did come not very charged. Here is our RGB20SX. We'll take a look at that in a minute. Some of the other things that came in the box, obviously a USB-A to USB-C charging cable. Came with some really extensive scratch paper. Has a couple of words on it. Nothing crazy. But it also came with the stickers that the original RGB20 came with. Pretty cool. I'm not going to put any of these on here. I do know though, if you put this on here, that the antlers will go up just below the screen right here in the border. And the most valuable thing inside this box is probably this rubber band that the charging cable was on. Love those things. Now we're not going to do a whole lot with this device because we've already pretty much reviewed this device with the RGB30. We've done a couple of videos on that device already, but we're going to run through the I/O here real quick because it is slightly different than the RGB30. On the top here, you do have an HDMI hole, and it is mini, not micro, which is kind of nice. On the back here, you do have your Powkiddy sticker, woohoo, and your shoulder buttons, which are really weird looking for some reason on this device, and I think it's the amount of gap that's below them. A really interesting design choice if you're trying to create something to put in your pocket. On the left-hand side over here, we do have our power and our reset button, which it really screws me up because they're on the wrong side. Any of these other devices that are in this vertical form factor like this have them on the right side. On the right hand side over here, we do have our volume up and down. You cannot just press and hold this button. You do have to continuously click it in order to get it to where it needs to be. Also, we do have our micro SD hole here. This is going to be for your operating system. Micro SD hole on the left hand side over here is going to be for your games. On the bottom here, we do have 2 C holes and a 355 hole. 1 C hole is for charging. The other C hole is for taking your info as an OTG port. On our buttons here, we do have our D-pad. It is the same D-pad they use in the RGB30. One thing I have noticed though is that this one here is actually a little flimsier. It moves. So if you had problems with your diagonals in your RGB30, odds are pretty good you're going to have worse diagonals here. You can fix that with some tape again, but it's crazy that they put this in here so loosely. I don't really understand that. You do have a speaker, very loud speaker, actually, and it's nice because it is front-facing right at you. Thank you, Ambernick, for coming out with that 353V and VS that had that front-facing speaker, so other companies would follow suit. You do have your ABXY buttons. They aren't glossy, which is nice. They don't get sticky or anything like that. They do actually feel pretty good in the hand, and they are about the right size. You do have your start select button, and then you do have a function button, which apparently Powkiddy, even after all these devices they've been putting this center function button on, starting with the RGB20, they still haven't figured out how to use this function button yet. It's still a non-used button here on the device. And you do have your joysticks, and they do have R3 and L3 capability. Power the device on here real quick. Now, some things to caveat here. You're going to notice I'm running Arc OS, and there's a reason for that. So I have tried all the OSs. Mine came with Rocknicks on it. I know some do come with Jealous on them. The ones that come with Jealous tend to run a little bit better out of the box. The emulators are just formatted a little better for the device. Now, one thing that's interesting about this is there is no software for this device, which is why you're seeing all these different softwares. Everybody, including Powkiddy, is using software that's built for the RGB30 and not for the RGB20SX. It does work because it is the same internals. It's just a different form factor, but I still feel like there might still need some tweaking and some customization for it just because of the way you are holding the device and looking at it. We'll go through the specs real quick if you're unfamiliar. This is an open source Linux system. Obviously, like I said, there's 3 different versions of Linux for sure that work on it. The screen resolution is 720 by 720, and it's a 1:1 aspect ratio 4-inch OCA full laminated display. It is running an ARM quad-core 1.8 GHz high-performance CPU, which is the Rocknicks 3566 chip. Runs full FPS at 60 GHz, and it is running 1 GB of LPDDR4 RAM. It does have Wi-Fi and Bluetooth built in, so it can be consoleized, and that's great with this HDMI port on the top. It does have a 5,000 milliamp battery, which gives you about 8 to 10 hours. It does charge off of a 5-volt 2-amp charger, which would be your USB-C to Type A. It does say that it supports USB fast charging. I don't believe that is true. Actually, the only cable I can get to work to actually charge it is the one that came in the box. Even the one that came from my RGB30 in that box does not work on this device for some reason. And I would imagine with the same internals, the same chipset, but the RGB30 also is very finicky about what cable can be used, which makes this a little bit less portable. Even though they say it has Type-C fast charging, I have yet to find a charger that will work. It'll say it's working for a minute and then it stops charging. That's just my experience with it. But we're going to go through and we're just going to play a couple games real quick. We're going to talk about what this is all about. Your best games that are going to be on a 1x1 handheld. Why would you want one? And why are they becoming so popular? There's another couple of these handhelds coming out right after this one by different manufacturers, and they're really designed around people who want some good old school retro gaming. We're talking Game Boy, Game Boy Color, Neo Geo Pocket Color, and then obviously Pico 8, which I believe I said in my last video, and if I didn't, I said in the post, but but I believe the RGB30 single-handedly brought growth to Pico 8. I'm guessing that they're seeing growth now at an exponential rate they've never seen before. And now all these 1x1 handhelds are coming out, and people are really into Pico 8. In fact, I do have an upcoming video where we're going to go into Pico 8 a little bit deeper and just kind of talk about what it's all about. But in the meantime, we're going to go through just a couple quick games here. We're going to talk about my likes and dislikes of this after about 2 weeks worth of using it, and then we'll go from there. So this thing is awesome for shmups, really set up for it. The RGB30 worked okay for these. I mean, I think it works really good for them, actually. But one thing that, I mean, you're obviously not using the whole screen. I probably maybe should have put some bezels on here, but regardless, one thing that's awesome about this is it feels like an arcade. So when you're playing, it actually feels like you're on an arcade machine, just the way that the arcades are built vertically versus the RGB30 where it's sideways. And honestly, I can't really call the RGB30 a horizontal handheld when it's square. I kind of feel like it's kind of an in-between a vertical and a horizontal. That's just maybe my own personal opinion, but I just don't feel like it's really a horizontal handheld. Just you're holding on to it so weird. This you can definitely tell it's a vertical handheld, and it definitely feels like you're playing an arcade. The way your menus work, function button does not work on any of these Powkiddy devices. It is the most random thing. So I have just decided that I'm going to use this as my fidget. So if I'm getting anxiety, I'll just sit here and push the function button. And it's definitely not going to bother other people around you because it's totally not loud. And then maybe you play with the back buttons. And then you go back to the function button. Nope, none of these are loud at all. If you want to get in your menus, you're going to hit select and X. That's going to bring you right into the menus for RetroArch, and you'll have access to everything you would typically have in RetroArch. If you do want to exit a game while you're in it, you can do the select start. It'll work just fine as well. The screen is perfect for your Game Boy Color. You could even go Game Boy Advance, and one thing that's cool about this is instead of running it, it's obviously not going to be 1-to-1, but instead of running it on a 4x3, this actually looks pretty good on an 8x7. It's not really overstretched. You can't really tell the difference. I know there's going to be people, purists out there, that are going to be mad about that, but it's not like trying to play PlayStation or anything like that on here, and I'll show you a 16x9 here in a second. So 8x7 works pretty well on here and makes it stay pretty well within the realms of what it's supposed to look like. Now here is running Game Boy Advance in its native resolution, and honestly you could just leave it this way as well. It does look really nice. I know there is a lot of screen real estate maybe not being used on the top and the bottom, but because of the way the screen is laid out, I don't really notice it. It's not like some other devices where it's very prevalent or some other systems where it's very prevalent. Game Boy Advance just looks really clean. One thing you'll notice too is this 720 screen puts this pretty much as a direct competitor against the Analog Pocket. If you're one of those people that's getting an Analog Pocket, using it to emulate on versus actually playing your own cartridges, you actually get a lot more value in a device like this than you would in the Analog Pocket itself. This is a much more valuable device for a person that's emulating versus a person that's using physical carts. You're going to get a really good screen. It's about a third of the price, and you can die just like that, just like you would on your Analog Pocket. Also, much easier to get, very comfortable. Analog Pocket is pretty comfortable. I have used it before. I couldn't tell you the difference in the screen, to be honest with you. If I look at them side by side, maybe, but for the most part, this is such a good screen that it really looks a lot like it. Size-wise, they're pretty comparable. This might be just a little bit heavier, but also I don't have a cartridge in here, and that makes a big difference on there. I know the cartridges are pretty light, but as far as bulkiness and things like that go, this just seems like a more comfortable device, even with its goofy shoulder buttons. They're just kind of a weird shape, and they do get stuck in your pocket, so this is not a pocketable device. These are sharp edges on the bottom, and they do get stuck right in your pocket. All in, this is a more comfortable device to play than the Analog Pocket, so my recommendation would be this over an Analog Pocket any day. Now, because this does have a 3566, you are able to play some Dreamcast, some N64. They're not all going to play the best, but there are worse ones out there. Games like Crazy Taxi you can kind of get away with just because there's so much chaos going on that you maybe not see the frame drops so much. But as you can see, we are running between 30 and 40 frames per second depending on how much chaos is actually happening on the screen at the time. You're going to run that same issue here that you run into some of these devices where retro achievements aren't going to work if you're playing in PPSSPP, because even if you hook up a keyboard, it will not save your settings. Now, as you can see, I am losing a lot of real estate on the screen, but if you're willing to do that and actually play this correctly in the aspect ratio, I think it looks really good. It's hard to pick up on camera, but the clarity on here is great. One thing we are seeing though is a lot of frame dips. We're seeing the speeds kind of dip every once in a while. It can usually hold it about between 45 and 55 FPS. Now we're at a solid 60 because there's not a whole lot going on in the game, but now as we get more involved here, see, as you saw, as I'm passing a car, it drops. Or there, as I jumped, it dropped down 20 FPS. So we are definitely getting some dips on here. Now we could fix this by changing some resolution settings and things like that, but it looks really good like this, and it's kind of a shame that with a 3566 in here, it can't play this game perfectly, because most devices can. But as long as you stay in first place, you'll stay around 60 FPS. So you just have to win, and then you won't see any of those frame dips. And like I said, you can play some pretty good Pico 8 on here too. Now this is kind of a weird one. I don't know if we can change the controls, but it just sits left and right is your pedals, but it is a fun game to play. As long as you can remember left and right, which kind of throws me off a little bit. This is the perfect way this game is supposed to look. It's exactly the way it's supposed to be. So just like your Game Boy and Game Boy Color games, it's right how it's supposed to be. If I could hit my head on my camera one more time today, that'd be fantastic. This seems to be an extension of some of these new Powkiddy devices that have been coming out pretty well. We have the RGB20SX, we have the RGB10X3, and the RGB30. All three of these devices are pretty decent devices for Powkiddy. They don't strike gold very often, and they seem to be doing pretty well with these particular devices. There are some other ones out there that are still coming out at the same time that are a little bit questionable. These are actually doing pretty well, and they all kind of sit within the same family, use a similar or the same chipset, and play the same or similar game. These two, the RGB10X3 and the RGB20SX, feel very, very sturdy. The RGB30 feels pretty good. Pretty sturdy, but not to the extent that these are. I really wish they would have come out with the RGB30 in the same blue. I don't know if it's the actual material that goes into this, but it does feel really good, and it's just a cool colorway. I really like the way that it looks, but I also like the way that my RGB30 turned out in the end, so I got no complaints about that. I'll have links to all these devices down in my thingamabob if you want to go take a look at them. I will have a link to the write-up on this device soon. I know I'm about 2 or 3 devices behind right now as far as getting the links up. As soon as it's available, it will be down in my thingamabob, and you'll be able to go to retrospect.gg, and it'll have all the information on this device, including any kind of tips and tricks that we come up with. So we'll go over my pros and cons real quick. We'll start with my cons. Not a lot here, but I don't like this way this D-pad moves around. It's killing me. It doesn't seem to have a whole lot of accidental diagonals, but it's a sharp D-pad too, so even when you're trying to play a fighting game, it does kind of feel like it's getting hooked on you. And then just knowing that it moves, I don't know if it affects it. It does have some accidental diagonals. A piece of tape would fix that. It's more or less the same diagonals we saw in the RGB30, but this one here in particular moves a lot more than the RGB30 one did, which I don't know if that was them trying to fix that problem and what that was all about. I don't really like this function button. I know that they had to keep it on here to keep the smiley face that the RGB20 was known for, but it's just a waste of a button. It is kind of cool to have a fidget button, I guess, but there's absolutely no reason for it to be on here. I feel like I'm hitting the closed door on the elevator and it's not closing any faster. And I just have a couple more things. The fact that you can't just hold the volume button, you actually have to click it about 1,473 times to get it all the way to max volume, and then down 147,000 whatever number I said times to get the volume back down to 0. You don't want to put this on max brightness. It will wash out the screen. You got to be between 70 and 80% brightness. We'll get the full saturation of the colors, which look beautiful. But if you go anything above like 70, 80%, it does start to wash the screen out. So just something to be aware of. Not really dislike, because if you're going to have the screen that bright, you're probably outside. You're not going to notice anyways, but just something to be aware of. It kind of drives me nuts that they swapped those volume buttons we were just talking about and then the power and reset button. Every other device, they're on the opposite side. So I do find myself trying to turn the volume up sometimes, and I'm either putting the device to sleep or I'm powering it down. There is also an issue with this operating system, and this has nothing to do with Powkiddy. Well, it does, because they didn't make an operating system for the device. If you hit the power button to put it to sleep, in ArcOS, it doesn't wake back up. It's up now. Oh, it just did it. It normally doesn't wake back up. Really? The one time I go to demonstrate it and then it works. Oh, there we go. So it goes like to this screen right here where you can tell the screen is on, but you can't see anything. So you put it to sleep. Okay, well, it did it once. It does it to me more time often than not. And then sometimes when the volume's up, the speakers crackle for a little bit, and then they get to normal if it's playing that background music. Just turn the background music off, you'll never notice. As far as my likes, I really wanted a vertical version of the RGB30. I didn't really realize how much I did until I played with the RGB20SX. The fact that this feels like an arcade machine really brings me way, way back into my childhood playing arcade games. It just feels so much more natural to play arcade games on here than it did on the RGB30. I know they can play the same games. I know they got the same screen. Still feels better on this, just the way that it's laid out. And at that point, the joysticks kind of make sense, because a lot of the arcade games use at least one joystick. So then it starts to make sense to have the joysticks here at the bottom. I do like ArcOS on here as well. Specifically, I have it on here because I'm going to do some of the upgrades that I did in the RGB30 on this device, and I wanted to make sure that ArcOS was going to work on here, because again, they didn't make software for this, so I'm actually running the RGB30 version of the OS on this RGB20SX. Without a specific software, I wanted to make sure that it was going to work. If you're going to stick with like a Jealous or Rocknix, I would go to Jealous, and I would try to see if you can find an older version of Jealous for the RGB30. They tend to work better on here than the last build that they did. Rocknix just isn't quite there yet. They don't have everything set up correctly. And another thing is, if you do go into Rocknix, like mine came with Rocknix on, and you go to another operating system, you actually can't power off the device initially. I'll leave a link down on my thingamabob for an article that I wrote on how to fix that problem. One way to fix it would be to pull the battery, but there's a way you can fix it by just using your original SD card with Rocknix on it, and that link will be down below. What do you think of the RGB20SX? Is this something that you're looking at picking up? Do you have an RGB30 and now you're getting a little FOMO because you want to get an RGB20SX, or you're just going to get one anyways? Is this what's going to be your tipping point to get to a 1x1 device? Let me know down in the comment section down below. And that's all I got for you today. Don't forget to comment, rate, subscribe, share this video with your friends, because sharing helps grow the channel, and your mom always shares my videos, so I don't know why you're not sharing them. At least then you'd know what she's doing on the socials. And once you get done with all the housekeeping stuff, there's a couple of videos up here on the screen that YouTube picked out for you. They say you're going to like them, and I tend to not disagree with them. And if you don't like them, leave that down in the comment section. I'm just interested to know, because sometimes I get really weird recommendations when I'm watching other people's videos, so I'm wondering if this is recommending the correct stuff, or if I need to change those settings, or leave them the way they are. But anyways, that's all I got for today. I'm out. Bye-bye!